Thank you very much, Dana, and thanks for the previous presentation. Very inspiring, brilliant. What I'm going to present, as Dana already said, comes from a different perspective. It's from a academic perspective. I'm going to present the project MAPA, which includes a methodology for identifying and characterizing precarious settlements. And the project MAPA is the outcome of a partnership between the Federal University of ABC, where I work, and the Company of Housing and Urban Development of the state of São Paulo, the CDA2. The CDA2, I should talk a little bit about this company. It's a public company which is related to the housing department of the state of São Paulo, and they are both responsible for developing the housing plan of the state of São Paulo. And the project MAPA consists on developing a set of methodologies and procedures to address the demands of to update and to improve the housing plan 2011-2023 for the state of São Paulo. And just talking a little bit about this housing plan, this was the first housing plan of the state that recognized precarious settlements, I mean by that favelas and other informal settlements, as one of the most relevant house problems of São Paulo, and it established a programmatic line focused on the upgrading of precarious settlements. But, and then comes a common problem, our official Brazilian assessments on housing needs, on housing deficit, actually they rely on census microdata, which in Brazil is actually a very rich data set, but also very poor in terms of spatial resolution. We kind of having a housing deficit assessment of the whole municipality, but where are those problems, right? And also, as in the other projects here presented, we also have poor data on precarious settlements. Our data is often not accurate. So if you want to update and to improve the housing plan of São Paulo, we need to improve information on precarious settlements and to explicitly consider these territories when assessing the housing deficit, when assessing the housing needs of the state. And CDA2 was already concerned about that, and was, when we started this project, they were already developing and coordinating a collaborative mapping initiative with the municipalities. So the idea was to integrate and standardize municipal information in a single web-based platform. Of course, this was not an easy task, as you have municipalities that have data and others don't have data, and others simply say that they don't have precarious settlements in the municipality when we actually know there is. So the goal of the MAPA project was to improve information first, to improve information on precarious settlements by integrating this knowledge of municipal and state actors that were involved with the collaborative mapping, academics, experts in the field of housing, and additional types of data through spatial model procedures that rely on integrating different types of data, census data, cartographic database, remotely sensed data, other open source data. And afterwards, to use these results to assess the housing deficit and housing inadequacies inside and outside precarious settlements. So the idea was to join this traditional approach to assess housing needs, this household-based approach, which is based on census microdata, traditional, with this place-based approach based on this database on precarious settlements. So the idea here was to relate these multiple dimensions of housing needs to the type of action need, because we have very different types of policies. If you have a need of housing provision inside a precarious settlement. So what we're talking about here is about a much more integrated action, slum upgrading, which is different when we have housing needs outside precarious settlements, right? So the project has mainly 3 phases. The first is to develop models to identify typologies of precarious settlements. The second, procedures to quantify, to estimate the total number of households in these precarious settlements. And finally, the third phase was to develop a methodology to assess, to have this multi-dimensional assessment of housing deficit inside and outside precarious settlements. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this first phase here, which are those models. If we want to develop models to identify precarious settlements, first we need to understand better what do we want to identify. So the first phase here, the first step was to define typologies of precarious settlements. So for that, we had a team with experience in housing studies that went to the field a lot, and with the support of the municipalities that were working in this collaborative process. So we had a pilot area. So this work was conducted for a pilot area that was this metropolitan region of Baixada Santista, which I'm pointing here. So just to have a little bit of geography, here we have Brazil, here the state of São Paulo. And in this little square, we have the metropolitan region of São Paulo, where you can find the municipality of São Paulo, also the ABC region. And just next, we have this Baixada Santista. It's a coastal area, and we chose this area because they had this ongoing process of collaborative mapping. It's also a very diverse area with different ecosystems, and we also have a diversity of precarious typologies of precarious settlements. So we defined 6 typologies, and each typology was carefully described by our team. And based on this description, we chose the variables, the data, and the variables that we were going to use in the models. Typology 1, just to illustrate, hill slopes. 2, we named it stilt house, wetlands, disordered occupation, more in plain areas. There is this other which is much more ordered. So we had an ordered layout here, a grid. And typology 6, which is sparse or poorly consolidated occupation. So based on these typologies, based on the description of these typologies, then we could create and integrate these variables in common spatial units to afterwards proceed to the generation of surface of probability. So here we generated a probability regarding the presence of each typology of precarious settlement and also the absence of precarious settlement. And this surface we want to do a step-by-step approach, so we could present this partial results to those that were involved with the mapping of precarious settlements. So here are some examples of the probability surface. Here, a lower probability of having a precarious settlement, and here higher. And here, more specifically, about the wetlands, these typologies where we have higher probabilities of finding this type of settlement. And once we had this surface of probability, they were then analyzed and classified as non-precarious. So each spatial unit was classified as non-precarious or as one of these defined typologies of precarious settlements. For that, we had a classification tree framework, but the thresholds to establish whether this is a settlement or not, this is precarious enough to be considered as a precarious settlements or not, these were manually defined and on purpose. So it could be more qualitative, right? And here the result of this classification of the different typologies, hill slopes, the T5, the ordered typology, the wetlands, and so on. And it's important to understand that our goal, our idea to have this surface of probability and classification maps, we understand it as an additional layer of information, which is a complement to other information that were being gathered on precarious settlements. So the idea was to have these layers, to put them together and to observe the convergence or divergency between these different layers of information and understand that this indicates a lower or a higher uncertainty about the presence of precarious settlements. And since we had two processes going on, the process of modeling and the process of collaborative mapping, so this was an interesting experience because one process helped the other. So while we got inputs from the collaborative mapping, the outputs of the modeling also were inputs for the collaborative mapping. So if the spatial model would point an area that it was not mapped yet, so we would discuss, we had several workshops with the municipalities together or separate. And then, it seems there is something here. So we had some field work together to check whether that was a precarious settlement or not. And then comes the question, what about this was made for the state of São Paulo? What about the rest of Brazil? Just to inform here that there is now another ongoing effort to develop a more general methodology to be applied to other Brazilian regions, which is a project conducted by IPEA, which is the Brazilian Institute for Applied Economic Research. This project is financed by the National Secretariat of Housing. And what's interesting in this project, I'm part of this project as well, is that we are exploring their alternative types of data, such as the Federal Register for Social Programs, which is constantly updated, but hasn't been much explored from a spatial perspective, which we are doing this now. And one big problem we had in this mapping process was the fact that all household social data that we were using were coming from the census, which is the census 2010. And the idea with this new project is to explore alternative data that are constantly updated. Here is our team at the Federal University of UFBC, those involved with the project MAP. And if any of you have any question or would like to know more about the project, please, you can write me and I will be glad to exchange ideas or give more information or anyway, anything. So thank you very, very much.